blow it up. This is a mess.
This is definitely the time of year for squinting.
Jared Goff to me. What do you do after this year?
And what we know is that this is like a Super Bowl caliber roster, in my opinion.
How did you blow it this badly? Aaron Rodgers was there. Kirk Cousins could have come home. Both could retire tomorrow, and both would wind up in the Hall of Fame.
And if he's not good, then everybody's fired.
They don't have ultimate confidence in Jalen Hurts as the guy. Aaron Rodgers is not that kind of weirdo. He's a different kind of weirdo.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast. I am your host, Dave Helman. Got a really fun show for y'all today. A big picture show, we'll call it, as we begin to transition more into the off-season mode of things. I know, look, everything's happening all the time in the NFL, but you see a little bit of a downtick after the NFL draft. Teams are bringing their rookies to their first workouts of their careers, rookie camp. We got OTAs and mini camp on the horizon. We'll have a 2025 schedule before too long. I believe that comes out next Wednesday, May 14th. Make sure you're here for that. In general, though, news not flying quite as quickly as we saw in March and April. Things tend to slow down a little bit. Not so much rapid reaction in May and June as there is the other 10 months of the NFL calendar. So we're going to take a big picture look. We're going to talk about players with the most pressure, facing the most expectations in this 2025 season. Guys who really need to have a nice year. And as you might guess about a topic like that, I'm going to talk a lot about quarterbacks in this show. Couldn't think of a better guest to have to do this with. Our buddy Dave Dameshek, friend of the show, hopped on to help me talk about that. And, of course, we were bound to hit on a few other things as well. Really great conversation with Dave Dameshek on today's show. Let's get into it. All right, always one of my favorite people to talk to. You can find him on Shek Show talking about just about anything. Steelers extraordinaire, NFL historian. I don't know, does that feel like a good enough intro? Dave Dameshek, how you doing, man?
Good enough for me, more than I deserve. What's the poop with you there, Helman?
I'm doing good, man. It's just like what we were talking about before we hit record. This is the time of year. You nailed it. This is the time of year where it makes sense to get some evergreen topics in the can, you know, with the very obvious exception of your Pittsburgh Steelers, who might be waiting on a quarterback to join them at some point. There's not a whole lot of big time movement expected here over the next few weeks, maybe even the next few months. We'll see. So it feels like a good time to have some evergreen conversations about what might be coming in the league this year, unless you want to break some Steelers news here. I mean, if you got something, please, I'm all ears.
No, I just, it is insane that they still don't have a quarterback. I know that they have Mason Rudolph, and I'm not diminishing him. And in fact, if I were in charge at this point, that would be the choice. It's your team now for 2025 there, at least until we give the kid Will Howard a look. I have no news to break here, but yeah, what's a fascinating sort of experiment is to hear what everybody said around the draft the day after. By the way, I love draft grades presented by the people who before the draft said, this is who these teams should take. And then those same people grade those teams for whether or not they drafted the players that they counseled them to. As it turns out, you get an A as an NFL team if the reviewer advised you to take that guy before the draft started. You may not get as graded as well. The fans now, from May until September, will talk themselves 32 times over, will talk themselves into maybe the playoffs, and at least half the fan bases will talk themselves into maybe a Lombardi.
This is definitely the time of year for squinting, and like yeah, I can see that. If that guy and that guy and that guy take a step forward, and if that guy stays healthy, and if they catch the right break on the road half of the division schedule, playoffs, baby, 10 wins, and then anything can happen in the tournament, right?
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't know what it says about our predisposition towards optimism. I don't think people are generally that, but with their football teams and given the amount of time before we actually have to see any evidence of whether or not they're good or not, it is fascinating. And it's specific to pro football, I think, versus the other major sports out there. Can you tell me? I wonder how many teams you could say right now, I am certain that team will not be in the playoffs at the end of the 25 season. It's a very short list.
I remember doing this exercise with Robert Mays a few years ago where we talked about how like this is a great time for optimism across the NFL because the list of teams that have no cause for hope is so small. Off the top of my head, I think I feel comfortable saying that I don't think the New York Jets can do it this year.
The AFC, I mean, it is an interesting time to do that little bit of a specific mini era we're in where there are so many high-end QBs that you get to 5 without even thinking about it.
And
like,
that's,
well, those
I mean,
5
that's
will
the
definitely
tough
make
part
the
of
play.
it. That's the tough part of it for sure. You know what? I'll give, if I'm squinting, I'll even give the Jets the benefit of the doubt with what they did on their offensive line. So maybe I'll say Cleveland and, geez, man, that's about as bold as I'm willing to get. I mean, I'm not a huge believer in the Mason Rudolph Steelers, if I'm being brutally honest with you, but
Except they always get, no matter who's the QB. I mean,
I was going to
would
say
get the
crazier
team.
things have happened. I mean, Mike Tomlin's never had a losing record, so even if that is not where the Steelers want to be, you can't rule the playoffs out as a possibility. So I hear you.
I would get the team to 6 wins, maybe 7. But if the offensive line progresses a little bit further, maybe the Giants you could throw into that. I'm just playing the game myself now off the top of my head, trying to.
The Giants are a team that comes to your mind immediately, but I love the pass rush. I think the offensive line could be better than people want to give it credit for. We know from very recent experience that Russell Wilson can play well enough to get you to the playoffs. And, you know, Malik Neighbors is a dog. I would not bet on this outcome, but I can't rule it out in May either.
And you want to say the Tennessee Titans, but of course we just witnessed what the transformational quality of Jaden Daniels
is Cam
in DC,
Ward being the right guy. Yeah,
right.
See,
it's a fun game to play.
It is an all-time era for parity and for optimism because you're right. I mean, at most, we're talking about 3 teams that don't really feel like they have a case right now. And I'm betting if you're a fan of one of the teams we just mentioned, you're probably ready to argue with us about why we should believe. So I love it. We can actually, I want to pick your brain a little bit more about the Steelers, but we can get there during the course of this conversation. So just set that up as a teaser for later. But the topic of the day, the reason that we're here, we want to talk about the players that are under the most pressure entering the 2025 season. If you want to call it the biggest expectations, the most pressure to perform, however you want to phrase it. And I said this in the intro, Dave, it's bound to be a quarterback heavy list for obvious reasons. But with that in mind, as you sit here, who comes to your brain when I say that? Players with the most pressure.
Well, I mean, I think you have to stipulate. Obviously, we understand it's the QB league, and so by definition, it's hard to put too much pressure on any non-QB. I mean, coaches is another discussion, but if we're sticking it to the guys wearing the helmets and pads and everything, yeah, I think it's exclusively QBs. The only one that came to mind when you say it that isn't a QB is potentially Travis Kelce, but that's diminished by the fact that he and his pals have already achieved so much. How much pressure can they rightly feel? But if they think we better do it this year because then I'm walking out the door for all of time, maybe you could talk yourself into that one and where the Chiefs are in general in the AFC power hierarchy and whether or not they can hold on to their spot. Is interesting over the season. But again, that's a little murkier to try to put some like, you better do it now after they already have so many Lombardis. How much do you need to see if you're a Chiefs fan? I would say that then I look at some of the cats who've been described as, however you want to put it, sort of Mahomes victims. There's a lot of empathy expressed out there in pro football circles for the guys who unfortunately got stuck in Patrick Mahomes' era. Never mind the fact that Fran Tarkenton got stuck in the era with Bradshaw and Staubach and Stabler and otherwise, and Jim Kelly got stuck in the era with Aikman and Steve Young and Brett Favre, and so it goes. But to look at those AFC guys, the AFC high end quarterbacks who really sort of are individually tracking towards the Hall of Fame, I think I start there and I go with Joe Burrow, especially given that the year he just had was really an all-timer individually at QB. And so the brain trust as it is there in Cincinnati, they look at it and say, hey, the franchise wants to keep not one, but both of these receivers. And we agree with that. That's a smart move to do. And so he's getting, he's now deep into his second deal. Now his two favorite targets have their deals. We'll see what happens with Hendrickson. Shamar Stewart, I don't know, man. You're asking a lot for that guy to boost an atrocious defense. I don't know that they did. I know that they didn't do anywhere close to fix up that defense to get it anywhere close to, say, top 10, a difference making in a positive way kind of defense. And if they miss the playoffs again, after the sort of the narrative was the defense is so terrible, but the reaction to it was, whatever we do, we can't lose this trio. You can't lose Burrow plus those two pass catchers. And so they made it so if that formula adds up to watching the playoffs again, I think there's going to be a real stink on Burrow and the entire little era, and it may cost the head coach his gig.
I think the thing that adds to that too is the role that Joe Burrow played here, for sure. Like the role that he played. And I know the Bengals would have done this stuff without Joe Burrow needling them, probably. I mean, Jamar Chase is the best receiver in football, arguably, at least one of them. T. Higgins. I don't need to explain this to anybody. But Joe Burrow was out here stumping for all of these guys. He was like, we have the money to keep T and Jamar. We have the money to we got to figure it out with Trey Hendrickson too. He was even stumping for Mike Gesicki, who is not on the level of all these other superstars, but still had a productive year at tight end for Cincinnati. He was like, I want them all. I want all four of these guys back in Cincinnati, and was very vocal about it on a number of occasions. And I think it's going to go poorly from a narrative standpoint. The Twitter mentions are going to be ugly. The talk shows are going to be ugly if after all of that, it falls flat, because typically quarterbacks can, even if they don't want to say it, they can fall back on like, hey, well, my hands are tied by what my front office decides to do. I didn't want them to draft that guy. I wanted somebody else. Joe Burrow got exactly what he wanted, basically. And if it doesn't work out, I don't think people are going to forget that.
Right. The public statements are a big factor in all of this. Like if Aaron Rodgers had never opened his yap about Jordan Love, if he hadn't reacted in the moment to that, it would be obviously it wouldn't have been 1/100th what it ended up being in the months and probably a couple of years after all that. You're exactly right. The smart play is, so much of it is PR in the 21st century with these QBs in the QB league. And somebody should have gotten in his ear and just said, like, hey, Joe, just keep saying above my pay grade. Of course, I'd love to keep my favorite targets, but above my pay grade, I have no say in what happens here. That should have been what he said. Instead, he went the other way. So he largely owns this one.
See, I'm gonna zag where you just zig, because I deeply appreciate Joe speaking up for what he wants, because I think it's the most likely path to get the Bengals where they want to go. I know it's going to be difficult to thread that needle with two mega receivers on your payroll, but give me the best offense in the league and I'll figure everything else out. Like if I've got those three guys, I'll figure the rest of it out. I think that gives you a leg up. And on top, maybe even more important than that, this is what we talk about when we say the right quarterback can change a franchise. Like, these are the cheap Cincinnati Bengals. This is the team that already ran one franchise quarterback out of town because they didn't want to help him compete for a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow speaking up for this, like I said, maybe they would have done it anyway, but it puts even more pressure on the Bengals, and they did it. They acted like a team that wants to win a Super Bowl. So I agree with you that Joe is under a lot of pressure, but I'm not going to kill him for speaking up for what he wants, because otherwise it might just be business as usual in Cincinnati.
I do think that if you turn every NFL franchise and, fans based on results that they just saw that ended the season, or otherwise people more and more are saying, and it's not just fans, it's owners as well, like, blow it up. This is a mess. We got to overhaul this entire thing here. Yes, I agree with what you're saying. And there is something to, well, that guy's past his prime. They should just kick him to the curb. That's diminishing returns. It's big business and all of that, but you want a sense of loyalty and all that kind of stuff. Like, no one outside this locker room really doesn't work if you are that cutthroat in terms of the way you operate. And if you are cavalier about, like, well, that guy's a year or so past his prime, he has no value to us anymore. You have to indicate to the guys coming in that this is a good situation that you want to be with for the long term. I think that's a legitimate factor in when you hear about the good teams, the stable teams. They understand how to play that, and the other teams that don't are lost at sea for a reason. I think the difference is, we've been talking about it for a decade or a dozen years now, but the second contract factor with QBs now, it was one thing when Joe Burrow, like, let's keep these two luxury pieces named Chase and Higgins. It's another thing when you're making the level of bank that Burrow is, consuming the percentage of the cap that he is, and now saying, yes, I know I am the difference maker here, but also in order to truly thrive, I need these two guys as well. So pay for them too, to the diminishment of the rest of the roster, and specifically the defense. It is weird. I don't know how I could see them getting into the playoffs. I don't know how you ever, I know that defense will get marginalized more and more and more with each passing season. But I mean, the dreck that they were throwing out there last year just doesn't rise to the minimum standard to make them legitimate contenders. So it is interesting. It's fun. It's splashy. It'll be fun for fantasy purposes, but I don't know how far the Bungles can reasonably ever go until they truly address the defense, right?
To your point,
a little bit.
They lost 5 games last year in which they scored 27 or more points. Which, I mean, it's bad. It speaks to how bad the defense was. But I can't help, and I'm a child of this offensive explosion. It's what I came up under, but I can't help but look at that and say, all right, we just need to be like one stop better per game, and this is like a 12-win team. And I think the answer to your query is you just got to nail draft picks. Like, Shamar Stewart has to be a stud. And unfortunately for the Bengals, that's been the story for years, and they really haven't nailed their drafts the way that you need to if you're going to have two $30 million receivers and a $50 million quarterback. Like, you have to hit home runs with your big money draft picks. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I'd say the Bengals really haven't, but it's a new year, Dave. Maybe this is the year that they find a young superstar with one of those draft picks.
Hey, man, right. And also they change defensive coordinators, which seemed weird in the moment to do it that way. But to your point, I think that Bill Belichick, who I mean, he left the Patriots a few years ago. He used to be their head coach.
Is that right?
I don't know what he's up to these days. I haven't heard anything about him really of late. But either way, there were some simple lessons that were, the foundation of how the 21st century Patriots kind of extended their run as long as they did. Very early on, the defense was high end. People have sort of forgotten about how good the defenses were, in those first few Super Bowl runs for the Patriots. But at some point early on in this millennium, Belichick sort of figures out that the premise of, like, 85 Bears, 76 Steelers, or whatever example you want to float there, like, the idea of keeping your foe to 9 points a game is gone now. Like, the rules and otherwise do not allow for you to dominate a team on that level. what you need to do, to your point, is now create a turnover or two over the course of the 60 minutes so that your high-end offense gets one or two more possessions than the other team does. That's how you win games more often than not. But they really, really got a little bit too severe with it in Cincinnati, right? I mean, like the defense is so bad that they couldn't hold any lead, even if they were in the lead for 4 seconds. That was going to be too many seconds for them to hold on to the lead the way the entire last season went. And I just don't see any modifications that would allow that to change in 25. So a lot of pressure on Burrow to make his formula work, which is to outscore everybody every week that they play a game.
I look forward to seeing them try. If last year was any indication,
It's
it
fun.
might not be elite winning football, but it is going to be entertaining. All right, I'll give you my first guy facing the most pressure. And I love this because I think it very perfectly demonstrates the different thought processes that we brought to this exercise. Because you picked, a guy that's been to the Super Bowl, a superstar player in the league, a guy that's looking to get over that hump. The pressure in your mind is about legacy. For me, it's about job security. And that's why I think one of the guys in the league this year facing the most pressure is Vikings quarterback JJ McCarthy, which sounds harsh considering we have not seen the guy play yet. He gave us 2.5 up and down quarters in the preseason. I think he played 5 series in the preseason opener and immediately felt soreness in his knee. He had surgery on his meniscus. We have not seen him since, other than these sideline shots. Incredible flow, by the way. Absolutely incredible flow on JJ McCarthy. But we need to see so much more in year 2 of a guy that was drafted in the top 10. And for me, Dave, it all stems back to what we know about the Minnesota Vikings and what we know is that this is like a Super Bowl caliber roster, in my opinion. This is a team that went 14-3. I can list the whole thing off for you. There's really not a true weakness on this roster other than the fact that their quarterback has never played regular season NFL football. Like, I mean, they got the weapons. They addressed their offensive line in a huge, huge way this offseason. Brian Flores is one of the most celebrated assistants in the NFL. Totally has gotten new life as a DC in Minnesota. We'll step in and even say Kevin O'Connell also has a track record for developing quarterbacks. He got Sam McDarnold paid $35 million a year this past offseason. He even got great play out of Kirk Cousins. I'll even throw in Josh Dobbs. He turned Josh Dobbs into a serviceable backup for a few weeks a couple years ago. So there's really nothing working against JJ McCarthy. Like, this is a picture perfect ecosystem for a young quarterback to step into. And if he's good, the Vikings are Super Bowl contenders. I think that's true. And if he's not good, then it could hold this entire thing back and mess up Minnesota's chances of contending. And that feels like a hell of a lot of pressure for a 22-year-old guy who's heading into his second year in the NFL.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit, Kevin O'Connell does, and Andy Reid, and the very small handful of actual QB whispers. There are a lot of alleged ones in pro football, but I think, Kevin O'Connell is legit one of those guys. And guys like that remind me of Jordan Belfort in Wolf of Wall Street. When he's talking about, like,
I'm excited where this is going.
Well, he's like, don't judge me by my successes because there's so many. Judge me by my failure. There's so few. Like, well, kind of like Kyle Shanahan, who he's made work. Like, consider the mediocrity that he has elevated over like Matt Ryan was good, but he made an MVP. He got Jimmy G, who was fine. He got him to a Super Bowl. Same as now going with Brock Purdy. Kevin O'Connell, look at what he's done. Look at what he just did with Sam Darnold. So I think it stands to reason that, and I think we talked about this a few months ago, that there's something to my hypothesis that with a lot of teams out there, that the offensive coordinator is ultimately, or the offensive mind of that team, as Kevin O'Connell is more important than the guy at the trigger. He could make a lot of guys work. He can elevate a lot of guys. I hear you on JJ McCarthy. My pushback on him, though, is there's a pretty good case that because he's young and we've never seen him anything, that it's almost unfair to put pressure on him. I do agree that the rest of the roster is kind of Super Bowl ready. Um, but it's the other three QBs in that division. They all have more like Jared Goff to me. What do you do after this year if it doesn't end with a deep playoff run, really end with a Super Bowl run, right? Unless there's some, crazy heartbreaker that isn't owed to Jared Goff in the title game. Anything less than a Super Bowl at this point in the Dan Campbell era, I feel like there's going to be a call for change on the other side of it if it doesn't work this time. But and a lot of that could have to do with the departing, like I just said, who's the real key to what the Lions have been doing. It certainly wasn't Jared Goff. Maybe it was the offensive line, but really it was Ben Johnson. Well, Ben Johnson's now in Chicago, so no excuses for the sophomore Caleb Williams at this point with how much they've surrounded him with talent. Remember, a year ago at this time, we were talking about no rookie QB will ever be in a more favorable situation than Caleb Williams is walking into in Chicago. Well, they stunk, and he was not very good for the vast majority of things. If he falls on his face now with Jaden Daniels still looming there, don't forget, too, that he will forever be compared to the guy who went behind him, and that guy who went behind them just played in the NFC title game. So there's that pressure, and let's see what Drake May does in Foxborough as well. So that's also behind Caleb Williams in the Chicago, the plague on it. I've talked with a reporter, I don't know if you've ever heard of her, Carmi V, and she made a similar case to about the Vikings being QB, being impervious to who is under center. They're QB proof now. The other thing exists, which is in Chicago that still 59 years, the best quarterback they've had in the Super Bowl era is Jay Cutler. That's a lot of stink that the Chicago fan base is putting on Caleb Williams and these Bears. They're going to have a short fuse for getting lit up if Caleb Williams starts year 2 in a mediocre or lousy fashion. And then who am I forgetting? Who didn't I mention? Mentioned the Bears.
Mr. Love.
Oh, and Jordan Love. I mean, we were very excited about them a year ago after what they did in the playoffs. Not as much after this past season. So I feel like this is a big spot for Jordan Love's career too.
I think my only pushback on your pushback is, again, I have more to work with from all of these guys. Like I agree with you about Jared Goff. I don't think Jared Goff is the straw that stirs that drink in Detroit, but we know that he can win 15 games for you with the roster that they have. Jordan Love, last year was a bit of a downturn. You're still talking about a guy that's gotten his team to the postseason both years he's been the starter. Caleb Williams, it was up and down. It definitely wasn't as pretty as everybody thought it should be, considering the hype. Still talking about a 3,900-yard passer, a guy who, like, I have something to go on and reason to think that he can improve. I got nothing with JJ McCarthy. Even if you want to take it back to college, remember the notes on JJ coming out of college were that he didn't have to do all that much in this loaded Michigan offense, and he very rarely was playing from behind or even playing in a lot of tied games. Like, Michigan just rolled over everybody during his tenure as their starter. So I got nothing to go on. And
my pushback to your pushback to my pushback,
yeah,
is that then the stink would go on Kevin O'Connell, not on the kid. Hey, you misread it. I thought you were Kevin a QB whisperer. Hey, you're the QB whisperer, bro. How did you blow it this badly? Aaron Rodgers was there. Kirk Cousins could have come home, and you decided to roll with this kid. You didn't have to do that. And now our entire Super Bowl worthy roster is scuttled because you had to prove something with this guy who was a borderline questionable pick when you made it in 2024.
That is a very valid point. And I am a little surprised that the Vikings didn't try harder to keep Daniel Jones. I get it if you don't want to play the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes at this point in his career, honestly. I was a little surprised they didn't try harder to keep Daniel Jones, although I thought a sneaky good move was the trade for Sam Howell during draft weekend. Like, not a name that's going to get anybody excited, but he threw for a boatload of yards on a bad Washington team a couple years ago. And again, Kevin O'Connell, QB whisperer. Maybe he sees something that not everybody else does. So Yeah, that's a valid point. Maybe Kevin O'Connell needs to find something to make it work, even if it's not JJ McCarthy. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that you traded up for to draft in the top 10 of the draft. And there aren't a lot of reasons why he shouldn't succeed.
I have no doubt,
I hear
not to
you about
belabor
Kevin, though.
the poor JJ McCarthy situation, which may end up being a fantastic situation. Um, I guess we'll know, and I suspect, not don't have to be a detective guess, that's why Aaron Rodgers, no matter how many times KOC and Ziggy Wolf and anybody else has stiff armed him, continues to be like, I'm coming to the banks of the three rivers. I just want to make 100% sure that the Vikings don't want me. Like, we've told you repeatedly, Aaron, please stop calling us. Okay, so it's a maybe? Like, no, please go to Pittsburgh, go anywhere. Just stay away from both of the Twin Cities. We don't want you in either one of them.
Do you think he's
Call you
holding
next
out?
week?
Do you think he's holding out until the Vikings get a look at JJ and Sam Howell in training camp? Maybe like, hey, just watch a few practices and tell me what you think before I commit somewhere else.
I mean, it would make sense to me if you were him that you would, that you think not how the world perceives him. It's how, what he thinks he can do. And I'm not just putting that on him. That has to do with the outsized confidence that any successful guy for any stretch of time in pro football at quarterback would have. Obviously, you're loaded up with confidence. But like a heavyweight boxer, they also don't seem to know when they have started to drop off. I could see him thinking like, I'm going to wait this out. Why do I have to hurry? Just because the teams want to know what I'm doing doesn't mean I have to play by their schedule. I mean, clearly that's who he is at this point, right? He's not anxious to go to camp. He's not anxious to participate in anything in springtime. So, I could see him sort of thinking, I'm in a position of luxury where if the starting quarterback gets hurt in any of the 32 spots in August, I get to play hero.
Oh man.
I don't know that. I have no reason to know that, but
No.
Of course, how would anybody know anything about what that cat's thinking about right now?
You don't know, and neither do I, but just thinking about a world where Aaron Rodgers is available to step in for an injured quarterback it's very intriguing. I can imagine the bonanza of television segments just thinking about it. All right, let's take it to your next guy, or guys, as the case may be. Because I think legacy is the theme for Dave Dameshek in this show.
Yeah, you could split hairs, and I'd make a case for one having a tick more pressure than the other, but let's just pair them up here. The two biggest losers, victims, whatever, of the Patrick Mahomes era, of course, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Both, we keep saying the phrase, you could make a case. I wonder, Helman, if you can make a case, or if you agree with my assertion here, both could retire tomorrow and both would wind up in the Hall of Fame. Like, people would say, enough has happened now with both of these guys. They've achieved enough. They both would wind up in the Hall of Fame, I think. The thing that's fascinating with me is with both of those guys is, and as opposed to all the other major sports and the biggest stars that you can think of in them, in the QB league, Dan Marino stands alone as an all-time great who never got it done. Fran Tarkenton, if you're super duper old, statistically, it is weird that all these decades later, his name still is in the top 20 a lot of those. He's the anomaly when you look at modern passing records. Like, Fran Tarkenton still in there. But of course, he didn't get over the hump. And then Jim Kelly, like we talked about earlier. But Marino is singular as like, that guy might be the best quarterback of all time, but he can't really enter the conversation without a single Lombardi. Well, we're looking at two guys who are tracking in that direction. At minimum, it is, as I always say, the one Lombardi per year conundrum. Everybody wants to, because they're good enough. Your eyes tell you, and your understanding of what you've seen be good enough to win a Super Bowl at QB, you understand intellectually, like, Well, I mean, that guy's numbers got to come up. There's no way Josh Allen can be that good and never win a Super Bowl. And same goes for Lamar Jackson. Both those guys have to win Super Bowls, but they're both coming up on 29 now, and they've been around for a while. And history tells us, at least, that this far into your career, it becomes unlikely that you're going to get a Super Bowl. Half of the guys that play in the Super Bowls this millennium are on their first deal. They're on their rookie deal still because you're in the sweet spot. You are you're surrounded by luxury pieces because your contract isn't that much for the team, so they can load up at the other positions. Ergo success. Once you start making $50-60 million, it gets a little tighter and you have to offset all the other deficiencies on your roster. And both those guys have done it largely. Patrick Mahomes keeps getting in their way, though. And best case scenario, if one guy does finally get to a Super Bowl, keep in mind, neither one of those guys has been to a Super Bowl yet. It's not that they haven't won a Super Bowl. They haven't even been to one yet. And still, I would say they're both Hall of Famers. And best case, one of them does finally get over the hump and goes to a Super Bowl. Well, then that's 1 year less likely that the other guy is ever going to win a Super Bowl. So I think they're both kind of damned by the simple math that they're only going to give out one Lombardi at the end of the tournament. And there's only going to be one tournament every year. And each one gets you a little bit further away from you getting it because presumably at this point you're in your prime. And so with each passing season, you get a little bit further away from the peak of that prime. And now somebody else is going to have to come in there and boost you up. And like we say, you're making so much money that it's hard to bring in those luxury items to offset whatever you've lost in the last 1 to 4 years. How say you?
This raises a couple questions for me. Obviously, I want to talk about Josh and Lamar, but I'm so interested by one thing that you just said, which is you're right. Like the team building cheat code for forever at this point has been the quarterback on his rookie deal. I think of it as really kicking into high gear with Russell Wilson and the way the Seahawks were able to build that team around him when he was still affordable. Do you think we're heading for a course correction or like a new era in that regard, simply because so many quarterbacks are making a crazy amount of money? Like it used to be this elite club of guys were making more than everybody else. And it was usually not more than like 6 to 8 players. I'm looking at it right now, and like half the starters in the NFL are making 40 million or more per year. So do you think we are heading into an era where teams are going to have no choice but to figure out how to win with an elite quarterback, or not even an elite, a high paid quarterback? Or do you think like young labor is going to continue to do this and we're just going to see teams, I hate to even say a specific name like Caleb Williams, but do you think teams are going to benefit from that cheap contract? Because it really feels like we're getting to a point where you're just not going to have a choice. It's just that expensive to have a quarterback these days.
I think I think the era that maybe immediately precedes that is the one that we're in. And you've mentioned parity before, and sort of if you're watching these NBA playoffs, in the last 4 or 5 years, it's become more and more so that there's only one way to win. Like there used to be some variation in if you run it through the low post, and now it's surround the floor with shooters and have guys who can knock it down, or you have no chance. It's that severe in the NFL now. Witness the fact you had 14 playoff teams this year. The team that won it all is the only one that you might make a case that Jalen Hurts isn't the guy, that they're not, they've paid him as such, but the way they run the offense and otherwise indicates that they don't have ultimate confidence in Jalen Hurts as the guy to cover up any deficiencies otherwise in what the unit is doing, but they still obviously fancy him quite a bit. At the other end of that spectrum was the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were a quick out with a joke at quarterback in Russell Wilson. Everybody else had the guy at quarterback. So the Eagles provide some optimism for the rest of pro football. If you don't have the guy that you can, if you build your roster top to bottom, like Howie Roseman did, but it's not a 1 or 2 year deal. Obviously, what the Eagles have done and why they've been playoff relevant for a decade with Carson Wentz or whoever else they threw out there is just loading up at the line of scrimmage, both sides over and over and over and over again. That's the model. It's what the Steelers are clearly trying to do, and several other teams are trying to do. The guys who don't have the QB is to try and fix that up, because if you dominate there, you're not completely lost at sea.
I think you have to throw the Lions in there too as a team. Like, no,
okay,
knock
that's
on
a good
Jared
point.
Goff,
Yeah, that's
but
fair. You're right. That's a good call.
If you nail everything else, even if you have to pay Jared Goff a lot of money, he can win you a ton of football games. It's just you have to nail everything else, and Howie Roseman has done a better job of it than anybody else over the last.
But it's
5 or 6
interesting
years.
too that the Rams exist as an example for all the scared teams who say or who talk about, who are overly precious with draft picks. That we can't deal that. We're going to hold. We can't give up a second round pick for that guy. You might buy that as a sober football fan if it weren't for the evidence that the Rams provided. I mean, it wasn't 20 years ago that they won that Super Bowl. They drafted Jared Goff, first overall. They had some success. He was MVP level kind of candidate at one point. They go to a Super Bowl with him. They pay him out and all of that, but they also know deep down, like, we can pay him like he's the guy, all that, but he ain't the guy ultimately to get us over the hump. So they trade him. They swing a deal for another first overall draft pick. Then they do win the Super Bowl. The problem was, from all the cynics at least, was deal with the devil. That's it. Like, the next decade is ruined. You're never going to be. You trade away all your draft picks to get that one Lombardi to try and engage Los Angeles sports fans a little bit. And did it work out? The Rams are just fine. They had a down year after and right back to it. To your point, draft well, easier said than done, but draft well, and that offsets the mistakes you make. You can give away draft picks. You can do all that. The world doesn't shudder because the Cardinals, if Cliff Kingsbury taught us nothing else in his time as a head coach, they drafted Josh Rosen with a top 10 pick. Then the next year, so we didn't get it right. And it's the only position that matters. So we're going to take another quarterback here. The math that teams like, for me, as the Pittsburgh Steelers, you guys got to get with it a little bit. Quarterback is all that matters. So you have to focus to the exclusion of other stuff sometimes on quarterback, because until you solve that, you ain't nowhere. And so, I think we are at that place. And I find it unsatisfying. Like, if you don't have the quarterback, you have no shot is not a great message in pro football, I don't think, because you want to have variation and different ways to skin the cat. Think of it as college football in the late 80s. It was fun to watch the U try and throw it over the wishbone of Oklahoma. That variation, the styles made the fight. Now it's just like, to your point, which quarterback can get one more possession over 60 minutes? Not really that much fun if you blur your eyes.
I'm not saying I completely disagree, but what the league clearly wants is as many of these Lamar versus Josh situations as possible. And when we get it, it's pretty freaking sweet. When you get Josh versus Lamar one week, followed by Josh versus Pat the next week in the playoffs, it hits really, really well. But you're right. That's cold comfort for people who don't have their answer at quarterback. My other question here, we know all of this. We know about Josh and Lamar. We know what they've done and what they haven't done. We know that they're under a lot of pressure. My question for you is, at what point do you start to get worried for them about whether or not it happens? Because, and to be clear, I am not worried. That's my first note when I started prepping for this show, is that Lamar Jackson just turned 28 and Josh Allen is still just 29. Neither one of these guys is even 30 yet. And I know, they rely on their athleticism, which is definitely a concern when you talk about how long they are going to be elite players. But I can't bring myself to be worried. I still feel like they have 5 years to get this done while they're still in their prime. And that feels like an eternity in a world where the average NFL roster turns over 30% every year. So
Okay, well, listen.
I'm not
Let me give
worried,
you
but are
that
you
pushback on
worried?
that. The 5
Yeah.
years that you talk about, and that you're exactly right. Roethlisberger at 38 is different than Tom Brady at 38. It's the Frank Gore factor. I always think about that when Frank Gore was having that late career run with the Niners and really, carrying the day for them some weeks. I remember talking name drop to Maurice Jones-Drew and say, how do you explain that in a world where no one has any value, no running back has any value past 26, that this guy's out there doing what he's doing? And he said, because he never depended on his athleticism. So he had nothing to lose. Chris Johnson loses a tenth off his 40 time. He's cooked because he's based around speed. Frank Gore was never based around any of that, so he didn't lose anything, and neither did Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Drew Brees until the very, very end. For those guys, if you're predicated to some degree on your athleticism, yeah, it's going to go a little bit more quickly than it is. I'm not worried about Josh Allen. He's going to get to live off that Sinners loot, Sinners Part 2 loot, I assume. But
Movie,
Lamar Jackson, and if Allen has, but the 5-year thing that you say, so what you're announcing is. So you're saying two. You're saying one for each of those guys, which allows one more for Mahomes. Does Stafford get another one? Does Aaron Rodgers have any late career magic? No, to that last one. But Justin Herbert in year 2 with Jim Harbaugh ain't maybe sneaky the team in the AFC this year. What about Joe Burrow and his getting what he wanted? Maybe that works out. We get Jalen Hurts and the Mighty Eagles ain't going nowhere. Jaden Daniels is just arriving. We can tick through all these teams and say, I can make a case for that team. So you're sure that Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, there's room for both of them? Because it ain't happening in the same year, because they're only going to give out the Lombardi to one guy in 1 year. So there have to be 2 separate seasons that end with separately those 2 guys winning it.
I'm a little more worried than I was 3 minutes ago.
Right? I mean, it's like just the math gets in the way of it. You think they deserve it, doesn't mean, but like Eastwood says in Unforgiven, deserves got nothing to do with it.
Phenomenal movie, first of all. I watched that a few weeks ago when Gene Hackman unfortunately passed, but also incredibly true of the NFL playoff race. I still, like I said, you're right. The math does not math as well as I would prefer, but they're both so good. And I do think even like I said, even though their games are not predicated, but even though their games rely on their athleticism to a good degree, I think both of those guys can be effective players, like Super Bowl caliber quarterbacks well into their 30s, at least like 33, 34. That's what I believe. And so maybe it's just because I want them to succeed. I'm just holding my breath and hoping that there's time enough for both of them to pull it off.
Well, one thing to inject into it as well, it affects all of them. But if you are one of those superhero with the superhero attributes at quarterback, it's got to be particularly vexing, because the weird spot we've reached in pro football this last year, very specifically the playoffs of 2024 in the January and February of 25, is the coaches and whatever have turned it into figure skating in the Olympics. You don't have to know anything about the Olympics. You've tuned it in once every 4 years, and all you have to know is, if you fall down, you don't win. That's the NFL playoffs. Now we're watching Lamar Jackson try to shoot it out with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, and the only thing we talk about is he tried to do something and he fumbled. That's the whole game. It comes down to he threw that bad interception. That's what we're doing now. We can't. It's too much. I get the idea of taking care of the football, and that's always mattered and everything else. But it's really rough now that it's all about eliminating athleticism, because that's what can get you into trouble. Hey, Josh Allen, we know you can do something that no one in the history of people has ever done. Don't do that, because you might fumble it, man.
Well, that just goes back to why I desperately hope both of these guys can get over the hump at some point in their careers. Because again, as I was prepping for this, I was just thinking back on all of the other great championship winning legendary quarterbacks, and going from, Peyton and Big Ben to Aaron Rodgers to Elway, they all have playoff skeletons in their closet, and nobody gives a shit the minute you win one Super Bowl. Like it's still there. It's still part of the historical record, but it's not what leads the story anymore. The minute you win one, it ceases to matter the way it matters when we're sitting here litigating it because you haven't gotten it done. And I hope that these guys aren't in a situation where we're doing this a decade from now.
I think that is, I've mentioned that before. That is a secret power of Brady's that he had over everybody else. He had a Super Bowl before he even knew what was happening. He went out there and threw for 4 yards against the Rams, and is the Super Bowl MVP. Should have been Tyler, Adam Vinatieri, obviously. But throws 3 passes, is a hero before he even knows what's going on. He has no pressure on him going, relatively speaking, he doesn't have that. For real, I get the confidence that is owed to having rare physical gifts, but Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen know they're pretty good. That goes away in January in those singular moments. And that's why it is the best theater there is, because somewhere deep down as you're watching it, how great he is. It's sort of like watching the Masters in the back nine of like, all that guy has to do, the guy who has the 2-stroke lead, is just repeat the swing he's made 1 trillion times in his life, but it's hard to do under pressure. All the accomplishments matter not when it's like, you have 3 minutes in a tie game to make your legacy. And the fact that some percentage of them can't come through or struggle with that is fascinating theater for us as human beings. And there is no assurance when you have the history of like, ooh, I haven't come through in a playoff game in a while. Like, ooh, I'm supposed to be carrying this team. You think that's not in Lamar Jackson's head in the second half of a big playoff game? Of course it is, or he's not a human being.
My last guy, like I said, we're just sticking true to our brands here because legacy, a big deal for you, understandably. For me, I'm fixated on another guy who has such a huge opportunity in front of him and not as much job security as he'd probably prefer, and that's Michael Penix Jr. The other guy that we haven't really seen from this 2024 draft class, JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr., and it's virtually the same story, Dave, because if you didn't think the Falcons are high on themselves before, just look what their offseason activity told you. The Falcons did next to nothing in free agency. I think Leonard Floyd is a really good player. He should help their pass rush. But if that's all you do as a team that didn't make the playoffs, that means that you think you're pretty damn good. And I get it. I mean, we know all the stars on the Falcons offense. They got all the pieces. Not doing a whole lot in free agency suggests to me that they think the year 2 version of Michael Penix Jr. is NFC South champion, playoff contender quality. And if I didn't believe that before, they doubled down in the draft because they were like, what's our biggest problem? Oh, pass rush? All right, we're going to draft 2 of them. And we're going to draft 2 of them by giving away a future first-round pick. This is all the behavior of a team that thinks it's close, which is incredible since the Falcons haven't won the division or made the playoffs in years. But that's the impression that I get from them. This is a team that thinks Michael Penix Jr. is the difference between being 8-9 and finishing behind Tampa and potentially winning 10 plus games and making a playoff run. And you just said it too, Dave. You gave credence to my argument. If he's not the guy, there's no reason an NFL team can't change course the very next year. Like, you're not guaranteed job security, even if you're a top 10 pick. And by the way, this is year 5 for general manager Terry Fontenot, who has made all of these decisions. If it doesn't work out this year, I'm going to step out on a limb and say a different GM will be in charge of this team next year. And then all bets are off for Michael Penix Jr. So, I mean, I think it's so fascinating to think if Michael Penix Jr. is good, this could be a sneaky NFC contender, a team that you could talk me into making a run like all the way to the NFC title game. And if he's not good, then everybody's fired, and who knows who will be their starting quarterback next year. I think all of that is true.
That all checks out. And the thing that maybe offsets a little bit of the pressure is the neighborhood in which they get to play. You know, people get real raw about the inequity in the divisions. Again, much like, oh, poor quarterback has to play in an era with another good quarterback. That has always been true. And there are always going to be, you know, some unevenness between the divisions. If you're the Falcons, you have to feel pretty good about yourself. It's the Bucks or you. That we know. Back to our where we started, the Saints ain't going to the playoffs.
We left the Saints off in our initial projection. I do feel pretty comfortable saying the Saints aren't a playoff team.
And you know, it's funny, like when the wheels get into motion and then it catches on, and then everybody agrees about something, that this is the climate that exists. We agreed like a year and a half ago, like, well, the AFC now, because of its young quarterbacks, is positioned to be way stronger than the NFC. I don't know if anybody's noticed it. The NFC is not a punchline. Like, it felt at this time a year ago, like, man, the AFC is so much better. Who are we even talking about in the NFC? It's 2 or 3 teams that could reasonably get to the Super Bowl. There's more there, but in the South, it feels like a 2-horse race, right? So yeah, I think they have a chance. It's an interesting point. It's also interesting to me. Raheem Morris, Mike Tomlin's longtime pal and everything. And it brings up this question for me. Like I say about Kevin O'Connell and Kyle Shanahan. And Kyle Shanahan is savvy enough to understand, and what has he done, and say he's gone to 2 Super Bowls in the last 5 years or so with Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy. That defines him then. That makes it that allows him to wear the honorific that everyone has put on him, QB whisperer. He can make any offense go. And people forget that he had Christian McCaffrey and he had Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and all of that. Yeah, he prefers to bring in good pieces, but so he understands the idea of an upgrade is an upgrade and can make us that much better, much as Saquon Barkley was a tick better than DeAndre Swift. And look at the difference that made in Philadelphia. So he wants CMC, but he got to a Super Bowl with Tevin Coleman and Raheem Mostert and Jimmy Garoppolo. The counter to that is Mike Tomlin is a defensive whiz. That's his specialty. Why then do the Pittsburgh Steelers need to keep drafting so much? Why? Cam Hayward is a future Hall of Famer. TJ Watt is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Minkah Fitzpatrick is a perennial All-Pro. Now they draft Derek Harmon. They used I don't know if it was technically a late first or the first pick of the second. I think it was first pick of the second on Joey Porter Jr. This team hasn't won a playoff game in 6 years. Shouldn't we be able to benefit from the luxury, much as when you have the guy at quarterback, like, okay, we need to fill out some other spots there, but at least we have that on lockdown. Shouldn't the defense be on lockdown if you have a defensive whiz as your coach? And now we can focus all our energy on the offense, because that's going to be good. That's going to be a difference-making unit thanks to the defensive guru we have in the coach's room. And yet it's not. Interesting, eh?
That is interesting, and it makes me think of Sean McDermott, actually. And I know
that's exactly right.
The Bills have spent plenty of capital on their defense over the course of time, but injuries happen. The ebbs and flows of a season, you lose guys because you can't pay them or because you don't want to pay them. I always feel absolute faith that Sean McDermott's defense is going to round into form at some point, because that's what happens. I'm not saying I'd go as far as to say I feel the same way about Mike Tomlin, but it is interesting that the Steelers have so much star power on that side of the ball, which has to be considered a leg up. And you're right. At some point, you probably do need to worry about the offense in equal measure, although I guess you could point out the Steelers have revamped their offensive line here over the last offseason or two. DK Metcalf is is an interesting move. It's more interesting once I know who's going to throw him the football, but maybe this is happening in Pittsburgh now.
Well, I think what it does is it gets him a year in front of George Pickens not being on the team in 2026, or maybe not even in 25. They've now replaced him with a number one guy there. It's sort of the other side to me, which you touch on, which is Sean McDermott. The answer is it's not something that Tomlin or McDermott aren't doing. It's an offensive league now. And when you lean too hard into like this team's going to win via defense, like, what are you doing, man? I don't know if you heard, like, it's all about the quarterback now. Did you see what happened in Washington? You have had a half dozen years now with Cam Hayward and TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick. It's added up to 0 playoff wins. Washington was a punchline. They drafted a quarterback and we're in the NFC title game 6 months later. It's such a straight line to the point that it's unsatisfying that you want to figure out there's got to be some higher arithmetic to all of this. And really, it is kind of that simple. Sean McDermott gets in the way. He's a defensive whiz, and that's supposed to take care of everything else. But it is funny that it does have to do, I think, with the league skewing offensively, that Sean McDermott and Mike Tomlin in the biggest spots don't make a difference for their team in a positive way. You could kind of say, like, the reason they haven't won is because of what Sean McDermott did or didn't do against the Chiefs in big spots.
I mean, we would need a separate show for this, but it is interesting. I have always favored a play calling head coach who makes the quarterback and the offense his business. I, as a young fan, grew up on the Sean Payton Saints. So that was clearly a model that worked very well that I gravitated toward. I would say in recent years, we have seen teams manage it with different styles of head coach. Like, you don't need that head coach, but you do have to either have a roster that's good enough to overcome that, or you need your head coach to make some type of tangible difference on game day, even if it's not as a play caller. Real quick, since we're talking about this, the last thing I did want to ask you, and I can tie my Falcons back into this. Can I interest you in a slightly unhappy Kirk Cousins, a mildly used Kirk Cousins? Like, is it Aaron Rodgers or bust for the Steelers, or should I be brainstorming other ideas to get them a quarterback?
You know, I know that everybody considers it terribly uninspired, and I understand why. But at this point, as I said, I'd be fine with Mason Rudolph. Witness, first of all, the whole thing about like this master plan that has been attributed to Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin. Oh, don't you see what they're doing? They're positioning for 2026 so they can trade up to get one of the quarterbacks from that better class. You mentioned Sam Howell before. Do you remember in 2021, the word was you don't want to take a quarterback this year because of how great the class is going to be in 2022. The guys who were the headliners of that class were Sam Howell, who, when he didn't have a high-end offensive line in his final year in school, fell on his face and fell way out of the first round, and Spencer Rattler, who fell so badly, he went to at least one other college before he even arrived in the NFL just last year. The mirage of next year is just kicking it down the road to that. So this idea that, like, this is a redshirt year for the entire roster, let's kick it to then. I don't think that 42-year-old weirdo Aaron Rodgers, like, well, Tom Brady did it. I do think we live in a new era in which what wasn't possible 10 or 20 years ago now is. LeBron James is a top 10 NBA guy at 40. Tom Brady won a Super Bowl, whatever he was, 44, 45. Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin still doing their thing in their late 30s. There's now evidence at this point in the human experience that guys hang on longer because of conditioning and all of that. But Aaron Rodgers is not that kind of weirdo. He's a different kind of weirdo completely. And what's more, he's a team wrecker. He tried to wreck the Packers on his way out the door, then went to the Jets and did wreck them. Why you would bring him into your building is insane. What's the thought process? Oh, Mike Tomlin, look at the miracles he's worked over the years. Look at what George Pickens, most head coaches wouldn't even be able to get him out onto the field. He wouldn't even play. Like, Great. What's it led to? George Pickens trying some of the time, ghosting the team other times. Is that beneficial ultimately to what the Steelers have been trying? Look at what he did with Antonio Brown. Now we realize once he got away from Tomlin how wacky he is. Terrific. They didn't win any playoff games. They went to a title game with Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown, a game in which they got waxed once again by the Patriots. The achievement, and yet somehow Tomlin has landed in this place that seems to me where he's a little high on his own supply, which is like, send me your problem children. I'm the lion on the island of misfit toys. I can fix all here. Like, how much are you going to fix them though, coach? Like, to how fixed will they be so that the roster thrives in January? Apparently not. No, we're not doing it to that degree. Then what's the point then? This thing of getting into the already disproven philosophy of the Indianapolis Colts until our chance comes up, till we are bad enough and things break in just such a way and we can cobble together some draft picks and otherwise to move up way up in the draft, we're just going to keep signing free agent mercenaries year after year. Phil Rivers, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz. Who cares? We're just going to keep doing that. But when the time is right, we'll strike. And so the Colts did. And it got him Anthony Richardson. Congratulations.
Well, so let me ask you this. I mean, the cost of Kirk Cousins at this point in his career, et cetera, shouldn't be prohibitive. Like, if the Steelers wanted to get that done. Yeah. I mean, is it Mason Rudolph or bust for you? Or like, is that a desirable route here?
To me, it would be. And, a lot of Steelers fans argue with me about this point. I think there's a perception based around name brand. I think people, just like they did with Russell Wilson a year ago, buy him a little more easily because they know he won a Super Bowl and, superstar and in quarterback and in commercials and all that kind of stuff. So you associate, like Mason Rudolph has none of that going for him. He feels like sort of like a backup QB in profile. The problem is that, people age, and Russell Wilson of 2024 was not the Russell Wilson of 5 years prior. And same is true of Aaron Rodgers. The main reason to not hold out and alter any sort of strategy that you would apply for this season or next around Aaron Rodgers, the bottom line is he's not very good. He doesn't rank in the top 20 in any meaningful statistic. I know everybody loves to point to, like, had a lot of touchdown passes, played better in the second half of the season than he did in the first. He's 42, didn't have a good year, is not a difference maker in a positive way for your team. What are we doing? What do we do? Oh, but Mike Tomlin will fix him. I think a lot of it is built on the sand that Mike Tomlin can fix guys on a level that other head coaches can't. And the evidence of that is starting to slip away from me.
I think the answer ultimately, Dave, is that we're making content, man. And we made some content here, and all of a sudden I am looking forward to the content that could be made if Aaron Rodgers is still available in training camp. I am mentally preparing myself for that already. We'll definitely have to check in with you as we arrive to those dog days of summer. But until then, man, this ton of fun as it always is. I appreciate you hopping on, and we'll chat soon.
Can't wait, Helman.
All right, that does it for us. Thanks again to Dave Dameshek for hopping on, and thanks to y'all for checking the show out. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not. Go find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. We will be back on Thursday with an all-new episode. And again, next week, the NFL schedule release is on deck. Really looking forward to that. Make sure you check in what we've got planned for the NFL schedule release. We know what all the games are, but it's still so exciting to see how they're going to unfold. It's like one more Christmas type event before we really get into the depth of the offseason. Make sure you check that out. Like I said, thank you so much. We're on YouTube also, if you want to go find us there. However you prefer to do it. We'll catch y'all next time. As always, I appreciate it, and I will talk to you real soon.